in the sky. All the shit you had to go through, only God could tell you why. So I gotta keep it focused, tunnel visions on my goals and promises make to myself. In my bag I'm stacking wealth, affirmations in the mirror so my days.
All right. Should we begin? Booze?
Yeah, I think we're going to start with Rachel queuing up that video, but most certainly.
Welcome, everyone. I just saw the music went off, so I'm like.
Absolutely.
Let me know.
And we're also maxed out with Rachel.
Yeah, we're queuing up the video. Naila's going to play it right now.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank y'all so much for being here.
Thank you.
We a group of revolutionary badass motherfuckers. And we came all the way out here to Palestine to build with our Palestinian brothers and sisters, to learn from them and to grow with them and to see what they go through every single day. We're from America, but we realize the struggle doesn't just stop there. Struggle goes all across the ocean, and we see right here brothers and sisters that are dealing with the very same things that we've been dealing with. Occupation, police terrorism, and state violence. And we stand next to people who continue to courageously struggle and resist the occupation. People who continue to dream and fight for freedom. From Ferguson to Palestine, the struggle for freedom continues.
Thank you for coming and not listening to the people that said this was dangerous. Yeah, maybe it is dangerous.
Well, for people that don't know, what did you say that allegedly got you fired?
What I'm saying is, I want every part of the region to be free. It means just what I said.
You don't want people living under oppression.
Exactly.
I feel a significant amount of rage right now, and a significant amount of grief, and a significant amount of resilience.
I just wish that a lot of my homeboys back home could have these experiences and be in these spaces to learn and grow.
We need to do a lot of unlearning, but I think this is a step in the right direction, this trip here.
We're doing this out of a necessity.
All of our land is occupied. Yeah. There's countless neighborhoods, countless demolitions, countless injustices. And so when you view it from that spectrum, it's almost like, oh, what happened to Mike Brown's terrible, as opposed to looking at the system that produces Mike Brown, right?
These things don't become attacked or critically analyzed until you have a moment of realization, until you have a moment of liberation.
So if you look straight ahead, we're now heading at the checkpoint. This is one of the largest checkpoints that's in the West Bank.
Everyone deserves to be here. It's Palestine. It welcomes any person from any culture. And I know that we're all gonna find our way to unite this struggle. And it makes me really, really hopeful as a Palestinian.
I think it's very important for you to be here in Palestine. You give a good impression to Palestinians.
We just walked through there, people trapped in. I mean, it's unimaginable. Like an entire society behind those walls. People blocked in like cattle.
Jerusalem is I, and I am Jerusalem, almost collapsing, almost too strong. Jerusalem once again is home, a home where the walls have ears and the ears have tongues and the tongues still lies, and the lies live, but life ends.
What if occupation's a dream the Palestinians had? Grills underneath their teeth and they suddenly relapse. Saw the ships at the bay of the West Bank shore. Woke up and the occupation existed no more.
This trip has been a brain fuck. Oh yeah. Like, for real. I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna fight, because I'm actually really angry.
I mean, you all are the Angela Davises and the Stokely Carmichaels and the Malcolm X's of our generation. Mm-hmm. And I'm just really humbled to be a part of this. You know that we won't stop. We know that y'all won't stop. We won't stop together. This is history, and we have much more history to be made. So we're gonna take this shot the next year in a free Jerusalem. So to all of you,
All right. Thank you, Rachel and Naila from the Dream Defenders. We want to welcome everyone who's joining us on this incredible conversation and live necessary moment. This event is organized by the Dream Defenders in the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights in partnership with theroot.com. And we are grateful to have our comrades here tonight with us. I wanted to begin. My name is Aja Monet. I'm a poet and organizer and comrade of these incredible people on this call. Today is Malcolm X's birthday. And with that being said, I think it is appropriate we start by acknowledging him. Truth is on the side of the oppressed. So he says, we want to name that we stand and organize in the legacy of the Black radical tradition and the many who came before us, Ethel Minor, Kwame Ture, June Jordan, Angela Davis, Alice Walker, the Black Panther Party, and more. There are Black brothers and sisters who have always historically made the connections between our struggles at home and abroad, learning and leaning into our differences, as well as confronting and examining the contradictions of any allegiance to America and its colonizing project. Poet June Jordan once wrote, "Sometimes I am the terrorist I must disarm." This sort of self-examination made it possible for her to explore what parts of her have internalized or absorbed ideas that may have harmed those she loved and those she never knew she loved. Each of us is responsible. As Black people, we demand to be more than surviving, and we are connected to our Palestinian comrades by more than our suffering and our struggle. We are connected by our shared visions for liberation, self-determination, and efforts to love, resist, and live full lives. Imagining a world where this is made possible for all of us. We stand in solidarity with oppressed people all over the globe. Huddled in the homes beneath hovering helicopters, blood blazed across the body boulevards in Brazil. We stand with Brazil. We feel the scream that licks the eye. Out of this war with wants, we wobble with the wounds. Demonstrations pulsing during this pandemic, which is also an abuse of power. We hear and stand in solidarity with the howling hearts battling the mounting police presence over the people of Colombia. We are watching, witnessing, and listening to the protests and liberation struggles in Haiti, Afghanistan, Iraq, India, El Salvador, all over the world. People are rising and waking up to their collective and interconnected power. We are here today, however, to stand in solidarity, to be vocal with our comrades from Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood drenched in skunk water, swelling with suitcases. We stand in solidarity with the children and families torn apart by Gaza's strikes. We are a worldwide people, and therefore we must strategize and imagine together globally. I want to introduce my brother and comrade, my friend, co-founder of the Dream Defenders and director of U.S. campaigns for Palestine. I would not be here without the work and the dedication of the Dream Defenders and organizing efforts to move and shift our movement into an international conscious movement, fully engaged. I was able to be a part of a delegation that you all saw the video for, a trailer that is a documentary that's coming out about that delegation, organized by himself and Maytha Al-Hassan in 2015. This delegation drastically changed my life. And it is the reason why we know that this movement is not just about talking points, but it's about our love for one another and the dreams that we have together and the real relationships that have been built and forged through our organizing over the years. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming right now my brother, Ahmed Abuzani.
Hey, thank you so much, Sister Aja. I love you. You know it. You're a real one. We certainly wouldn't be here without you. These are really heavy times and heavy moments. And so what I want to do is start off my time by lifting up the story of the El Kulak family from Gaza. A dear brother of mine named Hussam lost 21 members of his family in Gaza. Another dear friend of mine named Ahmed Hamad lost his cousin Ra'ed Hamad. And so I wanted to just mention their story and say that their loss will not be in vain, and we'll celebrate their memories in a free Palestine one day, inshallah. Being that Sister Aja mentioned that today is the birthday of another one of ours that was robbed of us, Malcolm X, I want to try to make it plain. A lot of times we can get lost in terminology that doesn't quite make it clear for people what Palestinian people have been living under for the past 73 years. And I often find that sometimes in defining an issue, it is equally as important to define what it is not as it is important to define what it is. And so I'll say to you, this is not a conflict. This is not a territorial dispute. This is not a bid to fit in. It is not complicated, and it is not a civil war. This is a liberation struggle for a Palestinian people, an indigenous population, opposing a brutal, fascist, apartheid, settler colonial regime. And so that's the framework that we have to look at the Palestinian cause through. And you'll hear from some of our comrades on the ground, and you'll see some images of loss of land, and you'll understand that this colonial project that started 73 years ago has been inching and inching and inching towards eliminating the Palestinian presence on the land, and in fact, eliminating Palestine. And so while the opposition likes to accuse Palestinians of wanting to push Israel off the map, Israel and Zionism has by its very definition and implications and actions driven Palestine off the map. And that process has continued to today. And that's why you're witnessing the resistance and resiliency of the Palestinian people in our commitment and steadfastness to liberation. And that's why you're witnessing the people of Sheikh Jarrah rising up, and the people of Gaza, and the people of 48 all over, Akka and Haifa and Ramallah and Gaza, of course. And we should be in full solidarity with our dear family in Palestine. Last thing I'll note before I pass it to our dear Dr. Angela Davis is that the Dream Defenders got involved in this cause because we understood transnationalism as a core tenet of our politic. We understood that as a part of the Black radical tradition, internationalism was a must. We understood that state-sanctioned violence, for it to truly have an end in the United States, must be in full solidarity with the abolition of these systems of violence and transgressions abroad. And so Dream Defenders, being born in response to the murder of Trayvon Martin, of course, saw the linkage between us and Palestine. And of course, more selfishly, as a Palestinian American born in Jerusalem, who first got involved in activism due to the Black radical tradition and the need to eliminate this oppression from the US, it was clear to me the parallels. And part of me had always yearned to just take my friends back to Palestine. And Aja and I have talked about this so many times, but many times when we experience these forms of oppression, we feel alone, and we feel like there's no hope. And these sorts of exchanges, these forms of solidarity, not only allow for us to continue to build out the coalition that will give us the victory that we've been yearning for, but it restores hope. And so thankful that we've been on this journey together, and I'm so thankful for this conversation today. I've taken up enough time for now. I'd like to introduce someone who I'm fortunate enough to consider a comrade, but also someone that I look up to so dearly. Dr. Angela Davis is a political activist, a scholar, an author, and a speaker. She's an outspoken advocate for the oppressed and exploited, running on Black liberation, prison abolition, and the intersections of race, gender, class, and international solidarity with Palestine. We most recently went viral on a video doing the dab together a couple of years ago. So thankful for you, Angela. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'd love to hand it over to you right now.
Thank you, Ahmed. And let me really thank the Dream Defenders and the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights for pulling together this event, for asking us to reflect on the relevance of the Palestinian struggle for freedom to the struggle for Black liberation in the Americas. It is really an honor to be in the presence of all of these phenomenal panelists who all made such important contributions to the struggle to defend the Palestinian resistance. Today, as Israel continues to bomb Gaza, where more than 200 people, including children, have been killed, as Palestinians in the West Bank and inside Israel are observing a general strike, as people all over the world demand an end to the evictions and demolitions in Sheikh Jarrah, an end to the bombing of Gaza, people here in the US, I think, are slowly recognizing that when we think about Palestine, Israel, it is the Palestinians who are calling for an end to the occupation, supported by increasing numbers of Jewish allies in Israel and in other parts of the world. It is they who represent the progressive direction of history. Freedom and democracy the world over will always remain unattainable goals as long as Israeli settler colonialism continues to oppress the Palestinian people. Black people in South Africa, in the Caribbean, and in South and North America understand that calls for Black internationalism are not abstract appeals for Black unity, but rather efforts to promote justice on the planet. And today that internationalism is especially needed as we witness both the assaults on our Palestinian comrades and their courageous and far-reaching acts of resistance, including the general strike on the West Bank and inside Israel. It is our collective responsibility to stand with them and to call upon all those who support Black liberation to recognize that Palestinian liberation is integrally connected to Black freedom. As both Aja and Ahmad pointed out, today is May 19th, the birthday of Malcolm X, but also the birthday of Ho Chi Minh. And for any Black people who might be inclined to participate in the moral panic directed against Asians in this country, I want to call forth the historical memory of the role played by opposition to the war in Vietnam and deepening and widening our notion of what it means to struggle against racism. And of course, Malcolm issued a warning against Zionism that helped to create a tradition of Black solidarity with Palestine that moved SNCC and the Black Panther Party to stand firmly on the side of justice for Palestine, despite the widespread influence of Zionist ideas. As we are poised now to observe the 50th anniversary of George Jackson's assassination by San Quentin prison guards, we remember, as Greg Thomas has reminded us in his phenomenal project, George Jackson and the Son of Palestine, that a copy of the anthology of poetry of the Palestinian resistance was one of the 99 books in George's cell. And that and some of us will remember that the Black Panther Party newspaper mistakenly credited the poem by Sami al-Qasim to George Jackson. This was This was a wonderful and revealing mistake, attributing words of Palestinian resistance to a pivotal figure in the struggle for abolition and Black freedom. I shall not compromise. And to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist, resist, and resist. Because of the upcoming anniversary of George's assassination, I took another look at the list of the 99 books that were found in his cell and realized that he also had a book of poetry by June Jordan, who, of course, was a central protagonist in the effort to forge words and deeds of solidarity, drawing Black people in the Americas closer to the struggle in Palestine. June spoke out for Palestine at a time of reluctance and fear and capitulation to Zionism. And in 2021, her words continue to echo, linking Black feminism, abolition feminism to Gaza and occupied Palestine. I was born a Black woman, and now I am become a Palestinian. Against the relentless laughter of evil, there is less and less living room. And where are my loved ones? It is time to make our way home. If I may mention my own personal political experience when I was in jail awaiting trial on false charges of murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy in the early 1970s, I received, as I've said many times, a moving message of solidarity smuggled out of an Israeli prison, sent to me by Palestinian political prisoners. And serendipitously, or perhaps this was really meant to happen, when I visited East Jerusalem 10 years ago, I met one of the political prisoners who had signed that message so many decades ago. Those of us who learned about the protest action directed against segregated auto routes, this was maybe 9 or 10 years ago in occupied Palestine, and those highways bar Palestinians and they're designed exclusively for settlers. We felt greater bonds of solidarity when we learned that Palestinian resistors then called their actions freedom rides, recalling US Black students' freedom rides of the 1960s in the Deep South of this country. Those bonds of solidarity expressed by Malcolm X, by SNCC, the Black Panther Party, George Jackson, June Jordan, were reinforced by activists protesting the police murder of Mike Brown some 6 years ago. Not only was it the case that Palestinians led the effort to produce mass support of the Ferguson protesters all over the world, Palestinians taught us how to deepen the message of our own struggles. The call to demilitarize the police in the US, which evolved into the campaign to defund the police, reflected lessons learned from our Palestinian comrades, especially in light of the role the state of Israel has played in the global militarization of police. We've also learned from the Palestinian struggle how important it is to insist on structural understandings of racism, the globalities of racism from Brazil to France to Palestine to Minneapolis, Louisville to Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Palestinians supported our uprisings in the aftermath of the police lynching of George Floyd. And when Iyad el-Halak was killed in Jerusalem, protesters proclaimed from US to Palestine, racism is a crime. And of course, many of us here in the US also spoke out against the extrajudicial execution of Ahmed Abuzani. Now is the time to reach out to all of those who say no to racism, to racial capitalism, to heteropatriarchy, and to urge them to join our collective call for an end to Israeli attacks on Gaza. We say, stop the bombing, stop the evictions, stop the demolitions, and end the occupation. If we want justice to prevail in the world, now is the time to say loudly and clearly, justice for Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Angela Davis. We appreciate your words and historical context for our movements in relationship to Palestine. We would love to now introduce two incredible organizers on the ground who are doing, who we were able to meet in our delegations and to continue to learn from as we try to support those who are resisting right now on the ground. We would like to introduce Ferouz, Director of Grassroots Al-Quds, or Grassroots Jerusalem. Hope I said that right. I'm getting my Arabic up, okay? And also Mohammed El-Kurd, who is my brother and comrade and fellow poet, journalist, writer, someone who has also faced the displacement of his family from his home. And we would love to give you guys the stage to speak about what is currently going on the ground in Palestine and what you would like to see from us as comrades and what you have already seen that has inspired the movement on the ground now. Thank you so much.
Should I go?
Mm-hmm.
Please.
Hello, marhaba from Jerusalem. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm so excited. These are indeed the hard times, yeah, Ahmed. I agree with you that the times are hard, and with the assault on Gaza, with the number of Palestinian martyrs rising by the day, and the Israeli occupation forces airstrikes continuing as we speak in Gaza, and the colonial forces butchering Palestinians in the different parts of occupied Palestine, in 48 occupied lands as well as in 67 occupied lands. These are hard times. At the same time, something else is happening in Palestine as well. There is an uprising, and also scenes of resistance to the Israeli occupation are not new. Palestinians resist the occupation and have been resisting the occupation for over 73 years now. And it's not the first time we see people in Jerusalem uprising, or people in 48 occupied lands uprising, or in the West Bank or in Gaza. But I think that it has been a very long time since we have seen all of these parts rise up together simultaneously at the same time, backing each other up. And that's exactly what happened during the last few weeks. In the beginning, it was the story of Sheikh Jarrah, the expulsion of families from their homes and the systematic displacement continuing against Palestinians in Jerusalem. Jerusalem rose up against displacement, and the Sheikh Jarrah families received a lot of support and backup from Palestinians, not only from Jerusalem, but from other parts of occupied Palestine as well. And then the confrontations continued also around Damascus Gate and the control over the main public sphere in the city, where the Israeli occupation forces don't like to see Palestinians practicing their belonging and ownership over the city. And so even worship is a threat to the colonizer. And that is why we saw the occupation forces attacking worshippers inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan. But then Jerusalem Jerusalem was all up against the occupation, the oppression, the continuous dispossession. And when Jerusalem was attacked very viciously by the occupation forces, and we have seen them, I mean, we are used to their violence. I mean, we see this violence, it's a regular violence, but these times, these days, it is much harder than usual. And when Jerusalem was calling for help, Gaza came for the rescue. And then when Gaza started being bombed, it was 48 occupied lands that came to the rescue, and protests spread all over cities like Haifa and Akka and Al-Fahm and Majd al-Krum. And when it was harder on 48ers, then the West Bank rose up, and suddenly protests and marches, and not only demonstrations in the city centers around the West Bank, but people marching by the thousands, going to the seam zone, going to the checkpoints and protesting in front of the symbol of the Israeli occupation. So I think that these are not only painful days, but also at the same time, blessed days. These are days where we Palestinians are, first of all, practicing unity. And I think that it has been a very long time. Probably the last time was 21 years ago during the second Intifada, when we saw actually different parts of Palestine being in resistance together, organically, supporting each other and backing each other up. Other important things to notice about what is different this time, aside from the unity, and in addition to the unity, we saw that Palestinians are practicing what we call in Arabic faz'a and drone. These are traditions in our culture that we can translate to mutual aid and mutual support. Faz'a is when you come as a community to support someone in need and in urgency or emergency. And drone comes from the root of to help. So people coming to help, usually it is used in the context of harvesting the olives, because you need a lot of working hands when you harvest olives. And it was great, and I feel proud as a Palestinian to see how Palestinians were practicing and are still practicing these collective methods and this community hugging its individuals, despite individualism, despite the fact that the occupation divides and conquers us. I think that we are proving that this systematic division and fragmentation of the Palestinian people has failed. And it makes me so happy not only to see our people united and uprising and resisting together, it also makes me feel so glad to see that the Israeli occupation authorities are so frustrated after so many years, after investing so much time and strategizing and budgets on dividing Palestinians and isolating us from each other, creating false consciousness at certain places where Palestinians in 48 were driven to believe that they are actual citizens of the state of Israel, and their demands should be demands for equality and equal rights with the Israelis. I think that these days Palestinians all over occupied Palestine are saying we are all one people under one occupation and colonization, and we have one struggle for liberation. We have something in common that is moving us. I think that it is being heard louder than ever. And I think that this is something that we need to encourage and strategically maintain, and to keep the flame and to keep the community-led mobilization that happened here as long as it needs for us to be free. Another point to make about what's happening these days in Palestine is the role of the young generation. Looking at the young Palestinian youth in Jerusalem, who were leading the protests and are leading the protests right now, actually all over Palestine. We call them sometimes jokingly the TikTok generation. It's like those 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds who everybody thought are going to be born into a context that takes away any political awareness. They will not be aware politically. They are isolated more than ever from other Palestinian communities and other parts of Palestine. But still these kids, and I say kids because they are kids, they are out in the street, they are fearless, they are relentless, they are resilient. And I think that they give hope to the older generation. I think that they come to say, we are sick and tired of our failure of a leadership, whether it is the political leadership in 67 occupied lands or in 48 occupied lands. And I think that we need to build on this momentum. We need to strengthen our youth. We need to strengthen our connections between the different parts of Palestine. We have a lot of work to do. Of course, this uprising is going to suffer a harsh backlash, and already there is repression and there is oppression and there is massive arrests happening. Around 1,000 Palestinians have been arrested during this week alone as a result of these protests and uprising. And so I think that on our side, we Palestinians need to organize our community. We need to believe again in the power of community. We need to build those bridges that Israel has burnt down between the different parts of our occupied homeland. We need to organize together. We need to learn from each other. We need to strengthen those methods that we used and tactics that we used now organically during this uprising. And I am talking about organizing committees of protection to defend and protect Palestinians from lynching mobs of Zionists attacking Palestinians in cities like Lid and Haifa and Akka. I'm talking about lawyers organizing together in order to strategically follow up on the huge number of Palestinians arrested and making sure that no person who is arrested is forgotten and not taken care of. I am talking about nurses and the doctors who set up field clinics in areas where ambulances cannot reach during confrontations because the army blocks the roads. And I think that these are tactics and strategies that we need to build on, and this connection and networking needs to happen also globally. I think that connecting the struggles for justice around the world together with the Palestinian struggle is very important, because eventually we are all resisting the same enemy. We are resisting the same corporations and governments and colonial powers that have similar interests, and we are stronger if we build those ties, connections, learn from each other, and support each other as well.
Thank you, Farouza. Mohammed, I would love for you to touch a little bit on some of the things you shared with me yesterday about the things you've learned and the correlations that have been made between the struggle for Black liberation and the uprisings in the response to George Floyd and what you see happening on the ground now.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you also. Thanks, Ahmed. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you, Dr. Davis and Feroz. Thank you. Yeah, I lived in Atlanta for 4 years for my undergrad, and I lived in New York for a year, and I came here from New York because of the stuff going on in Sheikh Jarrah. And I think Atlanta has taught me so much, particularly in the past year. I think the unabashed movement that spurred out of the George Floyd murder has kind of forced itself within American discourse to articulate that we want to defund the police, we want to end policing, which is a conversation that hasn't been made before on a public level, on a mainstream level. There hasn't been a time where there was a general consensus or a large shift in narrative where people agreed publicly that they wanted to defund police. And I think had it not been for that, we wouldn't be here today in terms of the global public shift in opinion regarding Palestine. And I know we talked about this yesterday, and I told you this is especially true because being in Palestine is like having a police officer sleep in your bed. It's like being under constant police surveillance and constant brute force at all times. And this is particularly true in Jerusalem, in occupied Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah. And I think people who are able to watch what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah are able to see that a cop is a cop is a cop nowhere in the world, and a cop is an extension of these colonial systems, is an extension of capitalism, is an extension of white supremacy in a lot of ways. I want to give an update on Sheikh Jarrah, but I'll make it brief because I don't want us to despair. I think the situation today in Sheikh Jarrah is very bleak. It's very stark. It's been turned into a military zone. It's been blocked off from all areas. We've been experiencing a lot of police brutality. The occupation forces not only target us, but they target the medics that are coming to the neighborhoods. They target the journalists that come into the neighborhood. They've wounded so many children. Yesterday, a girl named Jana Kiswani was shot in her spine, and she currently is in a Al-Maqasid hospital. Our neighbor's home was invaded by the occupation forces and his leg was broken. And then the next day they came and tried to break his other leg. So we've been seeing a lot of police brutality here in Sheikh Jarrah. But at the same time, we have been seeing so much defiance. I think what defines the Palestinian people is our resilience. And as I'd like to say, our stubbornness. And I think in Sheikh Jarrah, we have shown them that we are incredibly stubborn. يعني بالعربي بنقول راسنا يابس, hard-headed. So much of the repression, so much of the police violence has been a back and forth. They have the skunk water car that I told you about. And so much of it has been us like running from the skunk water car, hiding, and then coming back into the street, chanting for whatever 30 seconds we have, and then the skunk water coming after us, and then hiding again and going back and forth. So I think what has made Sheikh Jarrah in the past few weeks feel significant is that we've maintained our dignity. We've been repressed by the police, but we've also been an opponent of that police, despite the power imbalance, despite them having their armors and their weapons and their rifles. So I'm very proud of Sheikh Jarrah, and I'm very proud of the people who took Sheikh Jarrah to a global mainstream place. I think what the Black Lives Matter movement and what the movement for Black liberation did also was, or one of the things it did was allow us to deconstruct language, even the language that we Palestinians have used historically. Now I feel comfortable saying the Israeli occupation forces, the Israeli occupation authorities publicly. And I feel like people identify and see what I'm saying without saying that I'm dramatizing it, or without saying that I'm over dramatic or whatever. And this is the work of smaller organizations, smaller grassroots organizations like Grassroots Al-Quds and other organizations that have implemented a decolonial language. Another thing is, for me to be able to show the world that what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah is actual ethnic cleansing and not an eviction. For me to be able to show clearly, explicitly how illegitimate the Israeli colonial courts are on a mainstream level has been a victory to me. For people to understand, for people from all around the world to look at the Israeli judicial system and understand that it's inherently colonial, that the settler is the judge, the settler is the jury, and the settler is the defendant, and the settler is the lawyer, and the settler is everybody in the judicial system. That feels like a victory to me, even though we are still in these courts, even though we still haven't been able to retain our homes. But I think there's these small victories in our ability to escape the occupation that is within our minds. Another example of this is what I like to call the Israeli myth of self-defense. Israelis have reconstructed their entire identity. Zionists have constructed their entire identity around them being always on the defensive, which is historically incorrect. They are never defending themselves against anything. Yet the language they implement on every assault on Gaza involves a defensive adjective. And I think being able to challenge this, being able to say on a public level, on a widespread level, then the so-called Israeli Defense Forces are a terrorist organization, and have people actually believe that and see that for themselves is another victory of our movement, a small victory. I have so many Palestinian American friends, who have good intentions, who have very good politics about Palestine, about Occupy Palestine. But they've told me so much in the past few years when I lived in the States that they're afraid. They're afraid of the conversations. They're afraid of the repercussions, of the consequences. And I think in the past few months, we've been able to convey that no matter the consequences, no matter how difficult the conversation, it'll never be as difficult as living under occupation. It'll never be as difficult as living under settler colonialism. And so people with platforms and without platforms, on dinner tables or for their Instagram followers, have been able to say loudly and clearly that not only they want to support Palestinian human rights and they want to defend Palestinians from human rights violations, but they also support Palestinians' right to self-articulate, Palestinians' right to self-defense, Palestinians' liberation movements, Palestinians' right to resistance. And they're able to say this clearly, despite the muzzles that we have been muzzled with for many, many years, despite the accusations of falsified things. I don't want to get into it, but despite all of these barriers, all of these colonial barriers that the occupation has implemented within our minds, even thousands of miles away in the United States or in France or whatever, even the things that have terrorized our parents, we are able now as a younger generation to overcome them. We're realizing that it's an active resistance to take up space and to be loud and clear about your position in these times, in these very important and historic times. I hate to say the word historic or unprecedented, and I often say it's an American thing to say, to call something unprecedented. I think Americans love saying for the first time ever, but truly, I think for the first time ever, we're having a time, like Firuz said, of national unity all across Palestine, despite the colonial fragmentations. And we're having a time where Palestine and Palestinian discourse is centering itself on the table, and it's kicking its feet up on the table. It's refusing to be cornered. It's refusing to be muzzled. And I'm very proud of that. And I think, should we be able to keep this momentum, we can get real changes. I want to conclude with a short verse from a poem. It's not mine. It's by a dissident Egyptian poet called Ahmed Abuzani. It's called La Tusalih, but I'll just read it in English. And I just want to say this to everybody that's been watching, to everybody that's been hesitant about what's happening in Gaza while it's getting carpet bombed, what's happening in Sheikh Jarrah while we're getting ethnically cleansed, what's happening in the South Hebron Hills where people are losing their homes and lands and farmlands, what's happening all over in Lid where people are having Jewish mobs terrorize them. I want to say to them what Ahmed Abuzani said: do not reconcile, even if they gift you gold. If I were to gouge out your eyes and place gems in their place, would you still see? These things cannot be bought. Thank you so much for listening to me. I appreciate you so much. It's such an honor to be on this panel. Thank you for your time and for your ears.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you so much. That was all very insightful and helpful and meaningful. And I want to move a little into the discussion around culture and the power of culture and cultural work. We know as artists, I mean, Mohammed, I think people know you as a young, vibrant activist and someone resisting in this moment, but you're also a poet and a cultural worker. And as an artist, poet, and organizer, one of the critical things that we learned from the Black arts movement and movements across the globe that, as well as even BDS in this moment, is the power of culture. And we see a true, genuine cultural shift in this moment that took a lot of strategy and organizing from artists and activists across the globe. And so I'm really honored to have, different cultural workers in their own right, Janaya, Future, Anwar, and Vic. And Vic, you have an article that you put out that basically tried to relay the connection between Palestine and Black folks. And one of the things that I wanted to stress from your article was, you said, as with the Black community in the US, the use of incarceration, racial profiling, and targeting the youth as methods of control are heavily prevalent in the occupied West Bank. The main difference I see between our oppression in America and that of Palestinians is how overt and shameless the face of discrimination is in occupied West Bank. As much as we ruminate on our metaphorical police state in Black America, martial law is a very real and tangible condition in Palestine. I would love for you to touch on what you witnessed and experienced on your delegation to the Dream Defenders to Palestine, and why Palestine? Why should Black people care about Palestine? Or why do you care about Palestine?
Thank you so much, Aja, for your constant guidance. And thank you to Booz as well for introducing me to the life change and experience that was visiting the West Bank. I also want to say thank you to Muhammad. It's good to see you again, as well as to Anwar for your friendship and your allyship. And I have to say thank you, and it's an honor to be in the presence of Dr. Angela Davis. I've never met you, but I'm a student of yours, and your words concerning the Black radical tradition, as well as the Palestinian liberation struggle, have been on my mind a lot recently. And I was thinking just now about the concept of terrorism and the ways in which that veiled, weaponized word are used by the powerful and oppressive to condemn the resistance of the poor and often desperate, you know what I'm saying? And so I think about Ronald Reagan speaking on your incarceration and saying that we've captured this terrorist in this moment. And I think about the scenes of that moment in the movement and was the real victim of terrorism. You know, when you think about Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. Murdered in a barrage of bullets in his sleep with his pregnant wife next to him, who was the terrorist? And as we look at Al Jazeera leveled in Gaza and family homes reduced to rubble from which babies' bodies are pulled out, who's terrorist? Syria, drone strikes, who's the terrorist? George Floyd's murder, lynching, Black church bombs, Dylan Roof. I had a thought recently as I watched his terrorism in the mosque, reading that the justification being given was that these young men, or some young men, threw rocks, threw stones, and I'm sorry, am I glitching? Can you hear me? I'm in a strange place right now, but
just as long as you're still,
yeah,
we
I was
can hear
reading that some young men threw stones. Okay, I was reading that some young men threw stones, and that was the reason that the IDF, or as I'm seeing people in the comments referring to them, the IOF, Israeli Occupation Forces, ran in and detonated explosives inside of a mosque. And it made me think about the analogy between down with Netanyahu's minister of propaganda. And, you know, I thought I was going to catch him up in his ridiculousness when I asked him, how is it possible that I'm watching
Oh, I think he froze. Did he freeze on y'all's screen? Okay.
Yeah, maybe we pivot to someone else.
Yeah, let's pivot. Ahmed, you had a question for Anwar and Future.
Yeah, I mean, Future, you know, you had the experience of being on the ground with us, so I think you could share that. But also, you come from an internationalist, transnationalist background. We met when you were out there repping BLM in Canada. And I'm just wondering how not only you've seen this shift and this moment evolve, but what was that experience like you in attending a delegation to Palestine?
What up, Ahmed? Grateful to be here. Hello, family. It was one of the most difficult and necessary experiences. Difficult, obviously, because I am seeing what is not just words, the occupation, not just words, apartheid, not just words, displacement, eviction. I'm meeting the people, Palestinian people who are living under those conditions, people who are fighting and resisting, even meeting folks, Jewish folks who understand intrinsically that that there's something morally bankrupt about what's happening. I use the word bankrupt because that is what occupations and that is what wars are. They're only ever economical. And in the case of Palestine, they're also ecological. I remember learning about how trees would be planted so that food couldn't be grown. So what we're talking about is one of the most sophisticated systems of occupation, of displacement, of ethnic cleansing, of a kind of apartheid that we have ever seen, so much so that to even utter the word Palestine is to be conflated with anti-Semitism. And to me, when the immense power of that word, Palestine, the immense power of the people, I think it's something that has to constantly be managed. And it works so effectively that we manage ourselves so that you come back. So we come back to the West. And now there are legitimate consequences for even uttering the word Palestine. And I remember when we put out, M4BL put out its political platform, Movement for Black Lives, and said that we stand in solidarity with Palestine, there were consequences. And this is the thing, anytime that you stand on the side of justice, there are consequences. And there is something that I do want to bring up because it feels really important. And it was a heartbreak moment for me here in the States. I remember right before Trump came into power, there was a debate amongst Black movements, and I think this is important to share, about whether or not engagement in the electoral system was something that should be considered, because it was the idea that Clinton and Trump were the same. And I want to be really clear, what I'm about to say is not to diminish the reality of America's relationship to Israel. Right before Obama left, he was arguably one of the most sympathetic presidents towards the Palestinian predicament since Jimmy Carter ensured that in 2016 that a $38 billion financial and military aid package was set in stone before he left. But as Trump was coming into office, there was a debate, or rather even during the election, and right before then there was a debate. Well, maybe if Trump were in power, America would see this is what we deserve. And I understand that there's a thing where this is what we deserve, and maybe this way everyone's going to have to talk about racism. And the thing is, under Trump's presidency, we saw the Overton window, that the way in which we see the world shift so dramatically to the right, that white supremacist mobs on the streets became normal, that an attack on the Capitol, an actual insurrection, became normal. And if the bar moves to the right here, it moves to the right everywhere else too. And I think that's what I want us to understand more than anything is this idea of internationalism. What happens when we don't understand that part of the work and part of the fight is in and against America's foreign policy positions and what it decides to support, that this has everything to do with not just the Black liberation struggle, but liberation struggles all over the world, that we have to move past the idea that identity can and should be the only thing that really focuses and centers our relationship to justice, which is not to, I want to say this, identity makes sense. I ended up in Black Lives Matter because I'm Black. Yeah. But if I only fought for my very specific experience, then all I would be doing is fighting for colonialism to restructure around myself, around experiences like mine, that identity can be our entry point into movements, but it should not be our exit point, that we have to be bound by values. We have to be bound by beliefs and by a belief system. And I think that's what we're seeing for the first, like there's a grappling, and so many of my comrades here sort of spoke to language shifting. I think that's important. What do we hear from police on the streets in America when they murder a Black person? I feared for my life. What are we hearing around the Israeli occupation? The language that is being shared is being conflated, but we are also sharing language. We are also sharing resistance strategies. We are also sharing so that now we can say Palestine, and the reason why we can say Palestine, and it's not just Palestinians saying it, is because we are saying it together. And that is our strength. That is our greatest strength and our greatest resource, because the only kind of justice, the truest kind of justice, is life, and in the preservation of life and in the quality of life. And these are some things that these are things that Palestinians are being denied. And so anytime that we're talking about shifting and change, we've got to look at what the levels of power are. And yes, structurally speaking, the levers of power are very much, in America's Congress. And really in this current occupation, of course, we know that there's at least a $3.8 billion aid package that goes to Israel every year. That is something that is blood money. I don't know what else to call it. That is blood money. And it is something that we actually can control. And we understand now today that it isn't just about grappling and trying to, exist and wrangle America's democratic process that still, devalues, minimizes, and attacks Black people's access to it. We also have to have a movement adjacent to that, that is grassroots in nature, and that constantly pushes our movements ever closer towards justice and towards the left. So, I want to say that there's a saying, in the movements, in movements and in Black movements, every time we fight, we win. And I think it can become diluted over time, or sometimes it just becomes a slogan, but it is true. And I know that Palestinian people have felt alone for so long. And I know that because Black people have felt alone for so long. And so we have to be together in this, and we are in fact together in this, that these systems borrow from each other as they grow more powerful and move ever towards the right. We have to move to ever closer to justice. And there's something to be said. There's something to be said about this moment that we're in, about the fact that we are together, about the fact that we can name Palestine, that even mainstream media is being forced to contend with our might, because we are finding each other in ways that we never have before. And so I want to say this, that we cannot be the, to borrow from Mark Lamont Hill's book, The Except for Palestine generation, we actually have to be the especially Palestine generation of people, that this is one of the greatest human rights atrocities in the world. And my freedom is bound up with the Palestinian people. Palestinian people's freedom is bound up with me. And there's, I can go on forever, so I'll say this. I saw the collapse of that building in Gaza, and I thought to myself, how can that ever be rebuilt? I had a moment of despair. I thought, how can this ever be rebuilt? And so I want to be sure that before all the bridges and all the buildings and everything else, before they can be built in concrete and mortar and stone, they're built inside of us. And I see the demolishment of that building. And so I am clear that every Palestinian in the world has a home in me and with me and in this movement. That is what our belief systems have to be, because that is in fact what we're combating, not at administration only, not when he was in office, Trump, not Netanyahu. This is bigger. This is a belief system that each and every regime borrows from. And we need our own belief system to combat it. And the way that we do that is we look at ground zero. We look at the people who are being most impacted today. We look at Palestine.
Thank you, Future. That was very, very thorough. I think a big part of what we hoped to bring up was all of us also have to look at ourselves deeply and what allegiances we have made and why, and what moments we're negotiating, how we negotiate our values. And I wanted to ask Anwar, I want to thank you for being here. I know we all are grappling with a lot right now, but something that was brought up was about, you know, people's fragility around the subject of Palestine, and understanding that a lot of people have a hesitation to speak about Palestine. And I know that you and your family are Palestinian and are in an industry where it is very difficult. It has been very difficult historically for people to be vocal about their solidarity, and you have been vocal. And I wanted you to speak on your experience as a Palestinian in America who has had to navigate these industries, and what you've had to learn, what you've experienced in solidarity. You also have been very vocal about the issues of Black people in this country. And so I wanted to ask you, what are some of the things that you and your family have learned, and why do you stand in solidarity with Black people in this moment? And in what ways has this moment encouraged, this cultural shift that you're seeing, encouraged you? Because I know that there was a moment where you were risking to speak, and now it's different.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for I'm so like blessed to be here and grateful to be here talking with all you guys and to listen to you guys speak. So that first and foremost. And you know, what I was thinking about is human connection, you know, and how, you know, on a personal level, I think that's what humans strive for, you know, with family, loved ones in general. So yeah, honestly, just I think that is that's something that people have kind of taken away and forgotten about, you know, in a lot of moments. And just kind of bring it back to what you're talking about censorship, you know. It's like it's one of those things where when you're speaking about freedom and the love of your people and humanity, you know, you expect people and just people maybe that don't agree with you, just to at least like I mean, you don't expect them to, but you at least hope for people to, you know, like listen and have respect towards what you have to say. But for a lot of people, it takes and companies, you know, and a lot of different organizations, it takes money out of their pockets to be represented or to represent people that have voices that would kind of change the narrative of the people that they could be working with or whatever it is, you know. So it just kind of it's a bunch of different things, you know, obviously. But I think the one thing that I've that has given me hope, and I think has given a lot of us hope, is bringing the power back to the people's voices, you know, and making sure that that's the most important thing. Yeah, basically bring it back to the people's voices and continuing to allow for that and to amplify those voices, you know, because that's basically the only thing that we can do in solidarity, you know. And the thing that I was talking about before, I mean, that you had asked, you know, is in solidarity, you know, and human connection kind of was kind of the pinpoint that I had seen, you know. And we can find peace, and we can find hope, and we can find strength in each other, you know. And freedom for Palestinians is freedom for everyone, kind of, you know, just what Future was saying. Everyone is kind of, you know, I feel like there's a collective consciousness that is coming to light, you know, where people are realizing that they have a shared fight. And yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things that came to my head, because we're talking about solidarity and the connection of the fights between Black Americans and Palestinians, you know. And a couple of things came up, you know, and basically, you know, training, you know, for IDF soldiers and for police, you know, the brutality and the constant inherent violent racist ideologies and things that have been moved out through these systems are they continue to affect people and affect children in the way that children grow up. And we're at a point right now where I see you all as family, and I know we have family and friends that we would do anything for, and when we can all come together and speak from our hearts and do those type of things, I think that's the most beautiful thing and the most important thing to move forward messages that are important, people that are really experiencing these things, and not the messages of governments and people that are trying to express their agendas,
Anwar, I have a little question to add that might help to clarify something simple. But there was somebody who asked, one of the people asked him the question, I thought maybe you could answer this more deeply than others, but if you were going to give advice to a Palestinian American who has been scared to speak up about their own community, because there are people who are currently Palestinian who are in positions and who are in places that they are afraid to speak about their own struggle. What advice would you get, or what advice has been given to you that has helped you be vocal?
I think just the advice is just keep remember that the Palestinian liberation and these things are pure, and they are inherently good and loving and peaceful organizations and collective and communities that come together. So to remember that and to keep that in your heart, and to not listen to the other voices, the voices telling you that you're being destructive or whatever it is, that you don't know enough information, all those things. You kind of have to push them away when you're fighting for something like this, and I think it's just even I don't know if Vic is still here, but it just we were talking about that, it's just in just that when we first met we were talking about that actually, just it's something that you have to continuously do and fight for, and it subsides, because people kind of just realize that they can't they're not gonna falter your voice, so.
Anwar, before we get back to the larger group with some questions, I was hoping, since Vic trailed off, if you could touch a little bit around that project that you and Vic collaborated on, because I think that really speaks to, the values and the lessons that we're trying to talk about in theory. I think I'd love for everyone to hear a little bit more about that project that you and Vic collaborated on in Chicago.
Definitely. Basically, just to keep it simple, we combated against police entrapment, where they were putting shoes in trucks and basically waiting for children to take the things that it was basketball shoes, all types of stuff that they were leaving in trucks, and basically putting video cameras on kids, entrapping them, and then arresting kids. It's just a terrible. You probably had heard about it and read about it, and it goes on in all types of different places in Palestine and in Chicago, and that's just the connection of realizing that there's people that are being subjugated to police brutality, all types of things, that they don't deserve. So that's kind of the connection, and also just it's important for us to all kind of come together on those things and realize the similarities, that the things that we look at and that we see, that we fight for in our backyards. People are fighting for the same things over in Palestine, so.
Thank you, Anwar. Yeah, the Anwar helped with Vic trying to get kids to bring sneakers back to kids in the community because of police entrapment trucks that were happening in Chicago. And there's a whole bunch of other things that the Chicago police do to assault and harm children, but that was one of the actions that he was trying to raise awareness around, and Anwar and Vic worked on that together. Booz, you want to get to these? We have a few more minutes, and there are some questions that people do want to ask you all. You know, go ahead, Booz.
Yeah, no, I could get us kicked off. So these are some questions from the audience, and we'll ask our panelists to self-select. If the question speaks to you, maybe you can just jump right in or raise your hand. But the question that was lifted up is, how can we maintain the momentum in the movement for Palestinian liberation right now? There's a dangerous notion out there that an end to the bombing of Gaza will make things, quote unquote, bearable again.
I can take a stab at this.
Please.
I think the question kind of answered itself, right? There is the dangerous notion that if the bombing stops, then the movement stops. But in reality, the mere fact of 2 million people being in an open air prison, being effectively in a cage where they cannot leave, where they don't have freedom of movement, is incredibly unacceptable and violent, and within itself warrants riots and burning tires, and warrants a revolution, and warrants all kinds of resistance. So I think people need to set the deadline of their resistance and their movement for when Palestine is liberated. I think we should not be taken bait from the Israeli occupation should they give us a ceasefire, even though I think Netanyahu and the Israelis at large are thirsty for Palestinian blood. I think we should continue in this fight despite bombings or no bombings. I think I'm honestly ashamed it's taken carpet bombing for the world to uprise. I think the very fact that Gaza is under siege and the fact that Palestinians in the West Bank are in an open air prison behind a wall should warrant within itself a revolution.
Thank you, Muhammad. Does anyone else want to add on to that?
I would love to. It's actually this framing is actually from Dr. Angela Davis. But the idea that you have to be an expert, it's just this false notion that in order to speak up on Palestine, you have to be some sort of ethno-religious linguistic expert. And that's just simply not the case. Ahmed framed this as very simple and non-complicated, and actually it is. And so I think, we're in a time of quick movements, and here's what I'm concerned with to this question's point. We went from Occupy to Black Lives Matter to Standing Rock to the Women's March to No Muslim Ban to Families Belong Together, Parkland, Me Too, and we've seen these movements shift, and I think that is very significant. So we're in a time of mass mobilization, of critical mass. But more important than that is critical connections. It's why the delegations happened in the first place. It's the backbone and the lifeblood of any movement is in our actual relationships to each other. And so there has to be, the way that we keep these sort of movements alive is so we break from this notion that we break from the notion that we sort of have to move on to the next thing. The larger relationship to our belief system, to our fight for justice, and the concept of internationalism, I think, has to be central to what activism and organizing looks like in the 21st century. And again, I want to come down on American foreign policy. It's really gotten a pass for movements in America because of the idea of exceptionalism. And I get it. Like, I came here and America feels like you feel like you're an ambulance chaser as a Black person. It's so difficult to keep up with the injustices, the daily injustices, the daily humiliations. I absolutely understand that, and we have that, those grassroots movements are so necessary to, I think, to do that work, but we can fall into this idea that what happens in America is the most important thing. And what's happening to me is the most important thing. And I think that I think we have to be very mindful of that framing and that exceptionalism that keeps us sort of being stuck in the West is a disservice to our own liberation work. Look how much we're learning from each other when we are in relationship to each other. It is what evolves our discourse, our language. It's what enables us to further our rhetorical production that become the keys that we eventually turn into levers of power. That's how movements start. And that's how they stay alive, right? They stay alive because we continue to breathe life into them. And so we have to stay. I don't know how else to say this. We have to stay here. That this has been happening for 73 years and that we have been running for, longer than that. So we have to stay, and I wish I had something more profound to say than that. I'm one who loves alliteration, but I'll leave it there because I can't think of it at the moment, but we have to stay.
Thank you. Something I want to emphasize in support of what Future shared to Black people who are listening, one of the tactics of Zionism is to try to discredit what you know to be true in your heart and your spirit, which is when you see children being murdered and homes and families being demolished, entire families being demolished, you don't need to know all the sides to know that people are dying. You don't need to know all the intellectual nuance of language and ideas and the history of when Israel was this and when Palestine was, you don't need all of that to literally see people being murdered and mass genocide and apartheid and say, this is wrong. That's it. There's no further discussion, intellectual, because that is a tactic to try to get you to question your own human heart. Right? And to start to believe the propaganda machine that will get you to support and make sense of and try to rationalize violence. It's the same sort of tactics that it's used when a Black child is murdered on the streets and they say, well, she had a knife in her hand, Makai had a knife in her hand and she was killed, or she was yelling at the officer, or there's no amount of reason for somebody to be murdered cold-blooded when they're supposed to be the state protecting the people and the citizens of that state, okay? There's no amount of logical rationale for it. So I want to give you the sort of, back power, fuel, battery power to stand true in your convictions. If you know that it's wrong here, it's wrong anywhere. If you see it be happening here and you're like, that's wrong and that's an injustice, it's an injustice anywhere. So that's a tactic. And it's really important that when we are faced with that kind of, because it's hostile, it will be hostile and it will try to discredit you and what you know to be true. You have to respond with the same sort of conviction, the same sort of diligence, the same sort of integrity and dignity that you would if you was your brother and sister around the corner. Yeah, you would for Mike Brown, that you would for Sandra Bland, that you would for all of these people that we have been naming. These are our brothers and sisters in the same vein. So I want to make sure that that is something that we leave you with, that you sit and meditate on, because they will try to get you to turn on your own self, okay? People will try to get you to turn on your own self. That's how power and oppression and abuse of power works. It corrupts our moral compass and corrupts our conscience. And so I think that it's important for you to be steadfast in your values of people and freedom and liberation and equality and justice. Remain steadfast in that way. I want to leave room for everyone to answer a question about what does free Palestine mean to you all? Someone has asked, what does free Palestine mean? Ferouz, I would love for maybe you to touch on this, and Angela Davis.
Well, my answer is very simple and short. I believe, excuse me, I believe that in order for one people to be free, all peoples need to be free. And for one oppressed group to be free, whether it is the Palestinians, whether it is people of color in the US, whether it is indigenous peoples around the world. And I think that in order for us to see freedom being practiced around the world, then we all need to mobilize together towards that collective freedom. A free Palestine means that black people in the US live in safety and self-determination, that they enjoy their culture and identity, because, you know, propaganda doesn't only make us doubt our opinions about or our moral compasses, but also it discredits our anger towards injustice. Yeah, it discredits my identity, it discredits my feeling of anger towards what is happening. And I think that the conviction we need is also the conviction that our struggle is right, and that our struggle is a very basic struggle for freedom, that it is not okay that people are not free in the 21st century, and that in order for us all to be free, we need all to liberate ourselves together.
Well, I think that the Palestinian people have the right to determine their destiny and their freedom. So I look to Ferouz and Mohammed and the Palestinian people to let us know what we need to support as they move along a trajectory toward freedom. Since the program is almost over, I want to emphasize the importance of organizing. I want to emphasize the importance of doing the work that will spread the work that will spread the word, that will allow people to open their eyes. And let's recall that 10 years ago, the movement in solidarity with Palestine did not look the way it looks today in the US. And the advances that have happened have all been due to the fact that Dream Defenders and, you know, other organizations have constantly pushed people to think about the indivisibility of justice. If we want justice, we must want justice for Palestine as well. And of course, we would not be where we are at this historical conjuncture had not it been for all of the work against racist police violence, which our Palestinian sisters and brothers assisted us to accomplish. So everyone can participate. It's about encouraging people to think more deeply, not to not be allowed to not allow the ideology, these terrible, you know, ideologies of Zionism and racism and colonialism to veil the realities that are so clear. So I just want to end by encouraging everyone to do whatever they can, whether they're artists, whether they're students, whether they're workers, members of unions, to make sure that all of us speak out loudly and clearly in the attacks on Palestine and in the occupation of Palestine, and allow the Palestinians to determine their trajectory toward freedom.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. That was perfect. Thank you. Ahmed, do you want to ask one last question from the group?
Yeah, I think we have a couple time for a bit more. So this one question came in. It said, what language should US and international outlets try to avoid when covering the movement to liberate Palestine and the Israeli occupation? Ferouz, Mohammed, I'm looking at you in particular.
Well, certainly conflict. It's one of the most commonly used terms to describe the settler colonialist project in Palestine. And I think that's one of the biggest crimes when it comes to our struggle. A conflict implies that there are two entities equal or competing in power that are in conflict over something, in this case, land. And I think that it implies also a certain way to look at this struggle and to make your stand about it. So I think that it is more correct to call this as it is. It is settler colonialism, it is white supremacy, it is racism, And I think that by choosing the right terminology, we also choose the right path to overcome it. I think that it is important to use terms like occupation and colonization, appropriation. I think that it is dangerous to also, not only when it comes to terminology, but also to the scope, on the timeline when addressing the situation. Do not look at what is happening right now and only try to judge that narrow window of time, and people should see what's happening within a wider context. This is not a war between Hamas and Israel. This is an Israeli occupation assault on Gaza. I think that there are many terms that we are redefining, or that we are, and not only globally. Another very nice and promising thing we see here is how we are also internally in Arabic choosing and re-choosing our terminology and how we talk about Palestine. And I would like to end with the fact that I have been hearing the word liberation so often during my day, something that I didn't dream about having, and seeing quotes on social media like refugees saying that their parents said, oh, I might be even be able to return before I die, or I might be able to see a free Palestine. So I think not only the terminology, and I think you can follow certain Palestinian speakers and organizations and follow the conversation about the right and correct terminology, but also the terminology when it comes to our intentions, to our plans for the future. One of the hashtags that became famous during this last week, because it was also the Nakba commemoration day, and it was the 73rd year on the Nakba. And in recent years, we Palestinians have been counting. So I remember how the hashtags on social media would add another year every year. It's Nakba at 70, Nakba at 71, Nakba at 72. And this year, people started using the hashtag, which was in Arabic and translates to it's time that the Nakba ends. So I think that is the terminology and the language that we should encourage and that we should plant in our people's minds and in our comrades' minds when they want to practice true solidarity. It is also us together collectively using the right terminology that dictates our future steps as well.
Go ahead, Mohammed.
I think Fairuz answered really amazingly about the terminology, so I'll answer this from a different angle. I think the enemy, the direct enemy of the Palestinian people is the Israeli occupation. But as you say in English, it takes two to tango, and I think mainstream media has been the worst enemy of my people. I think I say this from a personal point of view. The amount of manufacturing consent, the amount of manipulation, the amount of fact twisting that I've experienced just in the past 2 weeks from American media speaking on Sheikh Jarrah has been absolutely infuriating. So I think one of the next steps for us as organizers, we should be pushing these mainstream media organizations to simply do their jobs. I am not asking journalists to be pro-Palestinian or be brave or be champions for justice. I'm not asking them to be Angela Davis. I'm not asking them to do, to do the most. I just want, if you went to your little journalism school and you learned that you're a journalism school that you have to be objective, then be objective. If you're a journalist and you're objectively reporting on the situation, then it certainly does not look like a conflict. If you're looking at this from a neutral perspective, it is certainly not a conflict. So this idea, this manufactured idea, this fabricated idea that this language of conflict is neutral, is objective, is manipulative as hell. It's not true. So I ask people to push journalists all around the world, and I ask the journalists that I'm sure are listening to us to simply go to your little job description, read the bullet points, and do them. That's all we ask, because you're doing so much to harm our cause. Thank you.
Tell the truth, why don't you? There's something that we did not mention that I think is important for Black people in America to know. There are Black Palestinians. There are also Black Israeli citizens. And as we were on our delegations, it's important that we understand, for the sake of having a conversation about our identity in the diaspora and how Black people move in the world, right? That if we want freedom for Black people here, we want freedom for Black people over there too. And I think that we must shout out and lean into our Black comrades in Philistine, in 48 territory and beyond, who have pushed Palestinians to Arab Palestinians and other community members to think about liberation more deeply and more intersectionally. We have to think about the women Palestinian, those of us who identify as women, right? And if we're on the front lines of women's liberation, there ain't no woman who's more of an advocate for liberation than Palestinian women. If you've ever met a Palestinian woman. So we have to see that, just like we'd like to talk about intersectionality here in the States, that Palestinian are intersectional people, right? Palestinians are not one broad brush. You cannot paint a broad brush across Palestinians. There are Black Palestinians. There are women, queer, all the layers of identity that Palestinians experience as well. But there was a question that was asked that I think I would love for folks to touch on, is what should we do about Black complicitness in terms of, in our movement, there are a lot of Black people who are silent about Palestine and who have been, for lack of better words, in cahoots with Zionist propaganda, who have helped to perpetuate the Zionist propaganda. How do we, as folks who are advocating, who want to be advocates for the Palestinian cause, who are Black people, struggle with our own people through this cause? What are the ways that we have found our struggles to be fruitful? Also, they can be very toxic. So what are the ways that we have found strategies to deal with Black Zionist propaganda in response to our solidarity with Palestinian liberation movements?
I'd love to hop in on that. I would just say, I have a thing where I think that the point is not to make people smaller. I think we tried that. It's to make our voices bigger, as to make our call to action larger. We don't actually need everybody on board to effect change. We really don't. All it's ever taken is a dedicated, committed few to make something that was unthinkable a new norm. It takes a kind of courage and a kind of commitment, which is essentially what we're calling for. So while I do believe it is important to I think push back and narrative correct when things are taking hold, our job is to have a strong house. People are always going to throw rocks at it, right? They're always going to, and if we're glass, if our jaws are made of glass, it's game over. But we need to have a strong house. And so I think previously a lot of time was spent on convincing, but people in of themselves do not represent levers of power. So I don't know that personally I'm interested in convincing people of things the way that I kind of was at some point about my pronoun, or that Black Life Matters, or something like that. I think that we organize, and we set new norms. And whenever necessary, we do have to do that sort of narrative and course correction. Even then, I'm not interested in, I think that it is not the best use of our time and our energy to prove somebody wrong. Our work is to prove ourselves right and true, and to make sure that that is documented, that we are loud, and that our arms are firmly linked together as we do so.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Much appreciate. Future. Did anyone else not get a chance to touch on that wanted to? We have, I think, one more question, and then we're going to try to bring this to a close. Okay, great. And Aja, as I understand it, is the question, do you know what the question is? I'm not really clear on the question, Aja.
No, it was just keep saying the question. I don't know what that means.
Okay.
I think what would be, people are asking about practical ways to organize, questions for people to organize around how do, what, oh, here we go. Yeah, this is it. So she kept saying just the Jewish question. I was like, what? Okay. How do we respond to people who say, quote unquote, free Palestine or the Palestinian movement equates to anti-Semitism or the end of Jewish protection? I do want to be clear real quick that we are in solidarity with all people's liberation, freedom, integrity, dignity, justice, equality, right to love, life, live, self-determination. Whether you are Jewish, Muslim, Jew, whatever you are, we are for you and your liberation, your freedom, and your justice and your equality. And so I want to be very clear that, you know, there is incredible work that Jewish Voices, JVP is doing that's making sure that, you know, people who are against the state of Israel and the crimes against humanity, against Palestinian people who identify, who live and move in the world as Jewish people, they are very vocal and organizing in this front. I think that there's a lot of work being done for Jewish people to organize in response to what's happening in Palestine. So I want to ask you all, this question has been asked over and over and over again, because as we know, that Future has touched on, Palestine has been a trigger word. And when you bring up that word, you have been often automatically conflated with being anti-Semitic. So how do we respond and dispel that myth?
Well, I'll begin by saying that that equation is absolutely ridiculous. It's a part of the propaganda that is designed to make people afraid of identifying with the Palestinian struggle for freedom. Most people who are opposed to racism include anti-Semitism within that. And we are as passionately opposed to anti-Semitism as we are opposed to anti-Black racism. But that opposition also includes passionate opposition to the occupation of Palestine. I don't think that we can be consistently anti-racist, consistently anti-Semitic, without being consistently pro-Palestinian. And if we lose the fear and speak back and speak out, things will change. I mean, I could talk at length about my own personal experiences. When I received this Human Rights Award that was withdrawn in Birmingham, there were all kinds of accusations of anti-Semitism, but within a short period of time, people began to talk. People began to do the organizing, and now that that institute addresses the question of a free Palestine, and they recognize that any call for justice has to include justice for Palestine. So yeah, that's a lot of bull. And we can't take it seriously. We have to speak back and recognize that everyone has the right to speak out against governments. We speak out against the government of the US. We also have the right to speak out against the government of the state of Israel.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I get very angry when I hear these easy equations. It makes no sense at all.
You don't ever have to apologize to us for making the truth plain, Dr. Davis. Never that. And we know that you have faced the brunt of these sort of accusations as much as many of us have. So I think you being able to articulate it for us is actually very freeing for many of us as we live through what your words. Booze, I think we rounded it out today.
Yo, thank you so much, everyone. The time truly flies when you're surrounded by such brilliance and passion and such driven individuals. I think we really held a informative conversation today for folks. We didn't get to every question. We know that's to be expected. I want to make sure that every single person, as you see the screen being shared now, every single person who's attended today is able to interact with this call to action that Palestinians on the ground have been lifting up. And so we understand that since we are actively engaged in the oppression of Palestinians on the ground, we know that we have greater work to do to allow for the context and allow for Palestinian liberation to truly take hold. So you're seeing on the screen right now a petition, and you can access that petition at bit.ly/riseupwithpalestine. And what we're calling for is sanctions, immediate sanctions against the state of Israel, and ending all US military aid to the state of Israel. Because if the state of Israel is not backed up by imperial powers, if it was never backed up by imperial powers in the first place, then we would have never seen the utter catastrophe that Palestinians have been experiencing for 73 plus years. So we ask everyone to share, tweet, contact your representatives, talk to a friend, have the tough conversation, read the texts. A lot of people were asking for texts to read. So I'm gonna lift up one from our very own dear Dr. Angela Davis right here. Please get this book. But as for Palestinian scholars, I'm going to lift up this book right here, Justice for Some, by our also dear Noor Arakat.
Yes.
And Palestine, A Socialist Introduction, which was just released recently. So the texts are out there, the calls to action are out there, and the people are committed and out there. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you all for being committed to a struggle for justice. And thank you all for joining us this evening.
And shout out to the Dream Defenders, to Rachel Gilmer and Naila Summers, who have helped make this whole event possible. The Dream Defenders has been steadfast in their support and commitment in organizing around Palestine and international liberation, as well as liberation at home. Please look up the organization and continue to find ways to support the work as we take the shots for doing the work. Thank you.
Thank you, family. Good night.
Thank you.
Fairuz and Muhammad, get some sleep.
Thank you.
Yes. Good night.
Yeah, thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Anwar. Thanks, Fairuz. Thanks, Mohammed.